From every screen, a ceaseless torrent of information descends. A chorus of confident voices, analysts, geostrategists, political scientists, all sketching the architecture of tomorrow. They attempt to chart the shifting of borders, to prophesize the fate of entire nations. It is a deeply human impulse, this desire to peer beyond the horizon, to know what the future holds. Yet, a disquieting truth emerges from this informational noise. Nearly all of these forecasts are wrong. The bold declarations of experts, armed with advanced degrees and leading prestigious institutions, turn to dust time and again against the hard edge of reality. Their words often decay into an embarrassing nonsense witnessed by all. Recall the authoritative pronouncements, made with absolute certainty not so long ago, of the imminent end of the State of Israel, its inhabitants to be resettled on the lands of Ukraine. But reality followed a different script. Nothing was closed. On the contrary, conflicts merely ignited with a new and terrible force, consuming neighboring territories. Geopolitics forges its own path, utterly indifferent to the predictions of credentialed specialists. And so, a fundamental question arises. Why are those who have dedicated their lives to the study of history and power so blind in their forecasts? Why do their meticulous models consistently fail? The answer lies not in a deficit of intellect, but in the very foundation of their knowledge. It is impossible to build an accurate forecast upon distorted data. If one's understanding of the past is built from textbooks written by designated authors, if one analyzes historical fables and officially approved charters, then one is studying a fabricated world. And by analyzing a fictional past, one cannot possibly draw true conclusions about the real future. To perceive the true shape of things to come, one must cast aside illusion and turn to the evidence itself, however incredible it may seem. Everything that is happening now has happened before. It is all part of a single, grand design. Contemporary geostrategists fail precisely because their theories are built upon a false chronology, upon events that never were. We are living within a global scenario, a script that is unfolding before our very eyes. This plan, which might be called a biblical project, was set in motion long ago. But the term long ago is itself relative. Official science asserts that modern humans have existed for tens of thousands of years. But if we set aside the tales of vanished ancient civilizations and look closely at our specific species, a shocking truth reveals itself. Our kind, which might be better described not as Homo sapiens, but as an artificially engineered social species, appeared on Earth only a few hundred years ago. If the very bedrock of our past is not what it seems, then what does that say about the future we are so desperately trying to build? The entire accepted history of our civilization is a fabrication, a story told to obscure a simple, unsettling truth. Humanity, as a social species, has a biography that is startlingly brief. To grasp this is to hold the key that unlocks the enigma of current events. Through this lens, the bewildering chaos of the modern world resolves into a chillingly coherent logic. You begin to understand why the shelves of our markets are saturated with a chemical simulacrum of food, why classical education is being systematically dismantled across the globe, why a new synthetic ethics and a specific radiant agenda are so relentlessly promoted throughout Europe and America. These are not random system failures. They are not the product of folly. They are sequential, deliberate steps in the execution of a vast and silent strategy. A strategy in which every one of us is an unwitting participant. This plan contains several key chapters. To understand our position within it, and to glimpse what awaits us, we must dissect each stage of our species' development, beginning from the moment of its true, unmythologized appearance. Only by casting aside the comforting dogmas of a deep and ancient past can we hope to see reality without distortion. The first, most fundamental chapter of this grand design can be captured in a single, potent word: creation. A concept that modern language often treats with condescension, but which originally held a profound, sacred meaning. We are all creations, particles of a higher design, engineered for a purpose that remains veiled from us. But the crucial question is not one of theology, but of chronology. When, precisely, was this process initiated? If we discard the familiar narratives of school textbooks and examine the hard data of social development, the timeline collapses. The settlement of our species on this planet shifts from the misty depths of millennia to the tangible, recent past, a mere few hundred years ago. The most compelling proof is not found in archaeological digs, where artifacts can be forged and interpretations skewed. It is found within ourselves, in the basic psychological programming that defines our species. We speak of compassion, of humanism, and most critically, of the love for a child, for one's neighbor. Official history assures us these qualities are an ancient, evolutionary inheritance. But the documented record paints a different and far more frightening picture. These foundational settings, the very software of our empathy, were not activated in humanity until the second half of the 19th century. Consider this simple, staggering fact. The first society for the protection of children anywhere in the world was founded only in the year 1875. Before this date, a date that marks a true turning point for our species, humanity as a whole gave no thought to the systemic protection of its own offspring. In fact, in many nations, societies for the protection of animals were established first. This evidence demands a terrifying question. If our deepest, most cherished instincts, the very impulses we believe make us human, are not an inherent part of our nature, but a recent upgrade, an installed code, then what are we? And who, or what, was the programmer? It is a chronological paradox, one that defies the grand narrative of our cultural development. The organizations designed to protect children appeared before the idea that children required protection. Are we to believe that across millennia of great empires and soaring civilizations, the thought never occurred? That in all those centuries, the child, the very vessel of the future, was deemed unworthy of unique consideration or defense? The skeptic will, of course, point to the treatises of antiquity, to the Greek thinkers and Roman humanists who wrote of virtue and love more than 2,000 years ago. But viewed through a critical lens, a stark possibility emerges that these texts are not ancient records, but later literary fabrications designed to artificially age our timeline. For there is always a vast chasm between lofty ideals written on paper and the brutal reality of social practice. Until the mid-19th century, the human being, and most especially the child, was viewed through a lens of pure utility. They were not perceived as complete individuals. They held no rights. The very concept of childhood, as we understand it, was absent from the world. This leads to a single, startling conclusion. Humanity, as a social species, has only just begun to mature. The entire span of history before the late 19th century was a kind of incubation, a period when the biological form, the hardware, was in place, but the programming, the software of morality, ethics, and empathy, was either not yet installed or was running in a primitive beta test. We were, in essence, raw material, a prototype, being prepared to become what we now call a civilized society. The architects of this project were in no hurry. They implemented new protocols of behavior gradually, observing. And so, the year 1875 and the final decades of the 19th century cease to be mere dates on a calendar. They become markers. The moment humanity, as a program, was officially launched. But to create a physical shell, to awaken even the most primary emotions, is only the beginning. Imagine millions of individual units, now capable of feeling, but utterly unaware of their location, their purpose, or the structure of the world around them. Their consciousness, a blank slate. Each one perceiving reality in its own chaotic, fragmented way. For any global system to function, this would not suffice. The empty mind required a structure, a single, coherent, and non-alternative model of reality. A uniform worldview had to be uploaded, in the shortest possible time, into the minds of millions. Identical concepts of the state, the nation, the border, even the very shape of the planet they inhabited. The task seemed impossible. How, in the span of a single generation, do you synchronize the perception of reality across an entire species, with no network to carry the signal? The architects of a new age required a tool of colossal power, a mechanism capable of overriding individual perception, replacing it with a collective illusion, an illusion that would, in time, become the only truth. And such a tool was found. The second chapter of the global plan, following the physical arrangement and primary tuning of society, was given a name: cognition. It was a critically important phase, beginning in the mid-19th century. Its objective was not merely the transmission of information, but the literal installation of a single, unified worldview into the consciousness of millions. The creators of this new reality needed to explain to their creations where they were, how their world was constructed, and by what rules it functioned. The human brain, a device of staggering complexity, is prone to fashioning its own unique interpretations. If one simply tells a group of people about a distant land or a complex machine, each will conjure a private image. Society would dissolve into a chaos of individual hallucinations. What the project's directors required was standardization. They needed to ensure that the picture of reality inside one person's mind would match the picture inside their neighbors with at least 80% fidelity. To realize this ambitious mandate, grand cities of cognition were deployed across the globe, known to us today as the world's fairs. Official history presents them as carnivals of industrial achievement, a celebration of commerce. But their true function was far deeper and far more insidious. They were giant training grounds, elaborate stage sets for programming the collective mind. Tens of millions of visitors streamed into these exhibitions, erected in every key territory of future development. People entered with disparate, fragmented notions of life. They exited with a clearly imprinted database. It was within these opulent pavilions, built with unbelievable pomp and circumstance, that the desired matrix of perception was forged. The common man, walking through the halls, received the complete visual package of what was to be considered normal. He was shown that the Earth was a sphere, demonstrated by enormous, silent globes. He was taught the political structure of the world. Nations exist. Each has a flag, an anthem, a people, and a border. An understanding of technology was instilled. Here are steam locomotives, industrial machines, and engines. They function in this way and no other. Social roles were codified here as well. This is how a police officer must look and behave. This, a doctor. This, a laborer, an aristocrat. In artificial canals, Venetian gondolas and Viking longships floated, manufacturing the illusion of a deep and varied history. The visitor's mind, hungry for order, absorbed these images, accepting them not as representations, but as absolute truth. Thus, individual fantasy was systematically replaced by a controlled, unified reality. The sheer scale and expense of these events defies imagination, raising a fundamental question not of history, but of existence itself. If a world can be built and taught, can it not also be unbuilt? And if the foundation of our shared reality is nothing more than a memory, installed long ago, how solid is the ground on which we truly stand? Entire cities, complete with palaces and intricate infrastructures, were erected in a matter of months. Their existence was fleeting, a brilliant, temporary stage designed to serve a single purpose: to program the human consciousness. Then, just as quickly, they were mercilessly erased from the landscape. To the uninitiated eye, it was an act of profound waste. In truth, it was an investment in the very software of a nascent humanity. By the 1930s, the need for such costly physical stagecraft began to fade. The project was ascending to a new technological plane. The baton was passed to a new medium: the motion picture. Cinema became the perfect instrument, not just to maintain the worldview that had been so carefully constructed, but to subtly adjust it in real time. Where an exhibition once required the construction of a building and the physical transportation of the masses, now a simple white sheet hung in a rural barn would suffice. With the flick of a switch, a projector could do the work of an entire city. The declaration that cinema was the most important of all the arts took on a chillingly technical meaning. Through the flickering light of the screen, the consciousness of billions could be synchronized simultaneously and with minimal expense. The motion picture did not merely show the world as it was. It modeled behavior. It dictated fashion, forged the images of friend and foe, and defined the very contours of love and hate. In every corner of the planet, from the sprawling metropolis to the most isolated village, the same version of reality was uploaded directly into the mind, rendering humanity manageable, predictable. By the middle of the 20th century, this grand chapter of indoctrination was complete. Humanity had been trained, socialized, and brought to a common denominator. The population now knew how the world worked, believed in the history that had been painted for them, and meticulously observed the established rules of the game. But for the next great leap, mere obedience was not enough. A unified, homogeneous mass is an asset for stability, but it is incapable of breakthrough. To create nuclear reactors, space rockets, and thinking machines, the architects of this plan required more than compliant executors. They needed creators, souls with a unique and volatile spark. The project needed genius. It needed minds capable of unraveling the deepest secrets of matter and energy. And so, a third chapter was initiated. It was perhaps the most complex, the most ruthless phase of the entire design. A system was unleashed with one objective: to separate the wheat from the chaff, to find those precious few who could drive progress into the unknown. The age of the great sorting had begun. The era of installation was over. The task was no longer to shape a compliant mass, but to fracture it, to meticulously sift through the consciousness of billions and extract the rare individuals who possessed the true gift of creation. On specially designated territories, in zones of accelerated development, the ultimate test was about to unfold. Across the Soviet Union, North America, and Germany, a new architecture for society was erected. Universal, compulsory, and profoundly rigorous education. The prevailing belief, a comforting narrative passed down through generations, is that these systems were built to foster well-rounded individuals, to elevate the cultural soul of the nation. This was a beautiful and useful myth. The true purpose of this gigantic machine was brutally pragmatic. It functioned not as a garden for nurturing minds, but as a great sieve. To unearth a physicist of genius, a visionary chemist, or a revolutionary engineer, one cannot simply ask for volunteers. Latent within the human population is a vast spectrum of innate talent, a unique neural wiring dormant in each individual, awaiting the precise stimulus to awaken it. The architect of our being, it seems, provided the blueprint, but forgot the instruction manual. The only way to discover this hidden potential was to subject millions of children to a rigid, overwhelming, and for the vast majority, agonizing educational process. The school curriculum was therefore saturated with disciplines that, for the average citizen, would have no practical application in life. Why would a future salesperson, a driver, or a clerk need to grasp the fundamentals of calculus? To memorize the molecular chains of organic chemistry? To comprehend the paradoxes of quantum mechanics? For 90% of all students, these lessons were a form of informational torture, a meaningless expenditure of time and mental energy. But for the system, this was the necessary price of discovery. This cognitive overload was, in fact, a resonance test. The system was bombarding the developing brain with complex concepts, hoping one might strike a resonant frequency. And among the millions of listless faces, it always did. There were the 10%, the ones whose eyes would illuminate at the sight of an elegant formula or a chemical reaction. Their minds would suddenly recognize a language they were born to speak. For them, this was not an ordeal. It was a moment of profound truth, the awakening of a sleeping giant within. These chosen few, having passed through the first and coarsest of the filters, were advanced to the next level, the institutes and universities. Here the mesh of the sieve became finer. In the Soviet Union, for example, thousands of scientific research institutes were established, employing millions. From the outside, the apparatus appeared inefficient, bloated with staff, mired in bureaucracy. But within the grand design, it served a vital purpose. This vast ecosystem was the nutrient medium. It was here, among the millions of merely competent minds, that the true geniuses, the hundreds who would define an era, could finally mature, their minds operating at the very edge of human potential. The result of this colossal separator surpassed all expectations. The 20th century became an age of unprecedented technological eruption. Nuclear-powered vessels and power plants, humanity's first steps into the void of space, the creation of the semiconductor, breakthroughs in medicine and fundamental physics that reshaped reality itself. All of it, the fruit of this brutal, meticulous, and deliberate harvest of minds. There was a system that sacrificed the comfort of the many for the genius of the few. A stark reminder that the great leaps of civilization are not always born of gentle nurturing, but are sometimes forged in the crucible of a vast and unforgiving design. The technological bedrock of modern civilization, from the invisible web of the internet to the silicon heart of the device in your hand, was laid in a bygone era. Everything we use today is merely a refinement, a commercialization of discoveries made during a period of intense intellectual filtration, a great sorting. This system extracted the maximum potential from its human material, acquiring the knowledge necessary to completely re-engineer the world. And it is here that we arrive at the critical turning point, the fracture in logic that explains the deep strangeness of our time. By the close of the 20th century, the primary objective of the Great Sorting was complete. Scientific and technical progress had reached a point of saturation. Further fundamental breakthroughs were no longer essential to ensure the comfortable existence of the species. The accumulated technologies of today are sufficient to build a literal paradise on Earth, to provide every human being with free energy, food, warmth, and shelter. A technical golden age is not a distant dream. It is possible right now. New Einsteins and Mendeleevs are no longer required on an industrial scale. The foundational knowledge base is full. So what do the unseen architects of this system do with a tool that has fulfilled its function? A mechanism that has become too expensive to maintain. They turn it off. This is the hidden logic behind the systemic degradation of education, its transformation into a mere service industry, and the replacement of fundamental knowledge with a narrow set of competencies. The great sieve is being dismantled, deemed no longer necessary. But with its disassembly, a far more terrifying question arises. If the technology for paradise already exists, but no one is building it, and the mass generation of creators has been halted, then what fate is intended for the billions of people who remain? We are entering the fourth, final, and most cynical phase of this grand project, where the rules of the game have been radically inverted. The objective is no longer the search for the best, but the quiet disposal of the unnecessary. With the dawn of the new millennium, we found ourselves in a completely different reality, one that many feel on an intuitive level, but dare not articulate. Where the 20th century was defined by a global effort to identify the finest minds to build a technological base, today, that base stands complete. The vector of global governance has reversed 180 degrees. The paradox is stark. We possess every tool for unprecedented prosperity, yet we witness the stagnation of fundamental science and the erosion of cultural norms. The search for the best has ended. A silent culling of the rest has begun. The engine of progress, having built the modern world, has been shut down. The blueprints for utopia are filed away, left to gather dust. And so we must ask, what is the designated purpose for a humanity that is no longer needed to build the future, because the future has already been built? The resources exist to forge a paradise upon this earth. The knowledge is in our hands to provide every soul with warmth, with shelter, with limitless energy. All the mechanisms for a prosperous and enlightened existence have been tested, proven, and stand ready. And yet, this future is not being initiated. The command from on high for universal well-being has not been given. And by all appearances, it never will be. Instead of a golden age, humanity has been offered a global test of endurance, a quiet examination for the right to proceed into tomorrow. The mechanics of this age are fundamentally different from all that came before. No longer are people driven by the lash. They are not compelled to learn by fear of expulsion, nor mobilized for great works by decree. On the contrary, all overt pressure has been removed. The great culling is achieved through the offering of an absolute, intoxicating freedom of choice. This is not a war of bombs and rockets. It is a silent war of temptation, where the battlefield is the consciousness of every single individual. Humanity has been allowed to relax, but woven into this relaxation are 1,000 hidden snares, each leading to a genetic cul-de-sac. The great separation of the wheat from the chaff is now underway, and its instrument is the mundane, everyday choice. Each individual is presented with a menu of surrogates. You enter a store, and the choice is yours. Purchase the natural product, or the beautiful packaging with chemical compositions that slowly degrade the body. You are offered leisure. Engage in the development of mind and spirit, or plunge into the haze of vapid indulgence, of endless digital consumption. But the most profound filter is set at the level of our most basic biological instinct, the continuation of the species. The information space is saturated with ideologies that lead to the termination of one's lineage. The promotion of a child-free existence, the erosion of the family unit, an aggressive feminism that insists a woman has no need for a man, and the ever-present agenda of radical identity politics. These are not merely passing fashions or struggles for rights. They are the instruments of a soft sterilization. The individual is told, "You are free. You may choose any identity. You may live for yourself alone." And the one who succumbs to this siren song, who chooses the path of least resistance and maximum hedonism, automatically strikes their own name from the book of life. They may live a pleasant yet biologically meaningless existence, but they will leave no progeny. Their genetic line will be severed. Herein lies a cynical yet flawless logic. No one is destroyed by force. The weak, the suggestible, those incapable of critical thought and of distinguishing substance from shadow, will simply sift themselves out. They voluntarily choose surrogate foods, surrogate relationships, and surrogate values, thereby vacating their space in the unfolding story of tomorrow. Only the hardy seeds will remain. Those who, despite the overwhelming noise of mass propaganda, can still discern the signal from the static. Those who understand that the ultimate freedom is not the pursuit of pleasure, but the acceptance of responsibility. For in this silent, global examination, the only passing grade is the continuation of life itself. In an age of limitless access, the ultimate trial is one of restraint. The challenge, to maintain a clarity of consciousness, a commitment to the foundational values of family, and the integrity of our own biological nature. There are those who see in this a design of almost biblical scope, a process that, despite its apparent severity, is ultimately just. It functions as an evolutionary filter, calibrated for a new and complex environment. From this perspective, the future does not belong to those who shout loudest for their rights in the present. It is inherited by those with the capacity to perpetuate their lineage, to pass on to their descendants a coherent and undiluted worldview. We are living through an era of the great sifting, and its outcome will not be determined by governments or corporations, but by the intimate, personal choice of every human being, made in the quiet moments of here and now.